Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're talking about how to plan a vegetable garden. I'll walk you through what my process is. Um, and it really doesn't matter what size of garden you have. The logic is the same. The planning process is the same. This is something that I look forward to all year. I do my planning for the next garden season over the winter break. When no gardening activities are taking place. So at least it gives me some joy to plan and think about what it is that I want to do in the next garden season or growing season. And I enjoy it. I try not to do any planning up until winter time because I look forward to it. And I do all my planning at that time. And I'm going to walk you through all of the different steps that I take to do it. And obviously, depending on the size of your garden or how you garden, if you're doing just a few containers, if you have a raised bed, if you have rows and rows of gardening, the logic is still the same in terms of when you can start seeds, when you can transplant things outside, when you can direct sow, how long your gardening season is, how long your growing season is based on where you're located. So we'll talk through all of that. As you know, if you don't already know, I love a good spreadsheet. So I have some spreadsheets that I use for this process, but you don't need to. You can draw it on a piece of paper, which is what I used to do back in the day when my garden was relatively small. But I've always found that it's nice to plan things out just for a visual reference. I find it helpful. Doesn't mean it works for everybody. A piece of paper works just fine. It worked fine for me for a few years at least. So first few things to keep in mind. You're planning a garden. First thing I do is inventory the seeds that I have. So I'll bring out all my seed packets. Obviously, if this is your first garden, skip this step. But I'll take out everything, count how many seeds I have roughly, and see what I have in hand. Usually it's things that I've grown before that have either been successful or not. I'll take stock of how old they are. There's certain seeds that you can keep them for years. Others you'll have to replace them in 2 or 3 years. And again, you can test them out, try to germinate some, and see if they're still viable. Or when you're seeding them, when you start planting those seeds, whether it's indoors, just plant more. Like if it's a packet that you've had for 3 or 4 years and you're not quite sure if they're viable, just put 3 or 4 in each block or pod or however it is that you're starting your seeds. Just to give a higher germination rate. So first thing, inventory what you have. Second thing, make a list of what you want to grow. And the most important thing here is grow what you and your family will eat. That's the key. You're growing food. The food, ultimately, the end goal is you're going to eat it. So there's no sense in growing something that's either just nice to look at or that's not going to get eaten. So that's the key thing. We grow a lot of, we like tomatoes, we grow a lot of greens, I grow garlic, and I'm going to get to that in a second because there's another consideration depending on the size of your garden. Things that you enjoy eating in the different seasons, right? So things that you'd like in the spring, like lettuce and greens and peas, things like that. Things that are summer crops that grow well during the summer heat. Again, depending on where you're located. For us, that's tomatoes, green beans, fruits, those types of things. And if you do have a fall season and you like to grow things in the fall, what are those things? Are they brassicas, broccoli, cauliflower, root veg, turnips, carrots, things like that? So make a list of all the things that you actually like to buy, like to grow. Usually it's things that you buy at the store that you're now going to try and grow yourself. Things that grow well in your area. That's also a good tip. And then the size of your garden. So in the earlier days, I had a very limited space. I just had a little, well, first off, I started in containers, but once I actually had one raised bed, which expanded to 2, which expanded. But in those early days, it was important for me to grow in the space that I had and not pick things that would take up a lot of real estate and that were there for a long time, like garlic. I didn't start growing garlic until I had enough space to be able to dedicate a raised bed just for garlic because I knew that it had to be there. Like we planted in October and I only harvested it in July. So that whole spring and early summer period, I wasn't using that bed because garlic was there. So things like that where it takes a long time for them to grow, onions, garlic, those types of things, or anything that was cheap to buy at the store, like potatoes. Onions falls into that too. Like it's one thing that you want to grow it yourself because it's fun and it's better flavor and whatnot. But if you have limited space, picking things like tomatoes, where one plant provides dozens of tomatoes, if not hundreds if you're growing cherry tomatoes, which is what I like to grow. Green beans, one plant will give you tons of green beans. Same thing with peas. Snow peas, sugar snap peas, those types of things, where you'll get a lot more bang for your buck if you choose those types of things, at least early on, and if you have limited space. If you have a lot of space, grow whatever it is that you want. That's totally fine. So what I want to do, and the other important thing is to know your frost dates, your early frost and your late frost. And the Farmer's Almanac site, I'll include a link down below. They have a great tool. You put in your zip code or your postal code, and it tells you what your frost dates are, based on where you live. Absolutely crucial, because that tells you when you can start transplanting things outside or direct seeding, and how long your growing season is. So let's say your first frost is middle of October. Working back from there, and I'll show you all of this in a second. Working back from there, you'll know that you'll have to start your seeds or plant something, let's say sometime in August, to be able to allow it to reach maturity and harvest before that first frost hits. All of this will make sense in a second. So let me throw up what, no, don't be alarmed. My spreadsheets are a little crazy looking, but we're going to use a couple of examples and just scale it back. The logic is the same. If you're planning with one raised bed, one container, it's all the same. I have 14 raised beds this year, so there's a lot going on, but the logic is the same. Nobody freak out. Let's take a look. Okay, so the first step is making a list of what you want to grow. So this is my list for this year. I basically list the plant, the type, if I know the variety. I usually do some research ahead of time, or I scour the seed catalogs, the websites, to pick out everything that I want to grow, and then figure out, am I going to direct sow this? Am I going to start it indoors? And the consideration for that is, depending on how long your growing season is and how you want to use your space. I use the square foot gardening method. If you're not familiar with that, I'll include the link below as well. It's basically an intense planting method where you can grow a lot in a small amount of space. And I use that paired with succession planting, which, because I started out with a very limited garden space, I would plan to grow things in the spring. And then before spring is over, or before I was even harvesting those things, I would start the next round of seeds for my summer crops to be able to, as soon as I harvested that spring crop, I'd have plants already ready to go indoors, so that after I harvest something, let's say bok choy in the spring, I would be planting or transplanting out my summer crop just to be able to get the most out of that space as possible in the time that I had. You don't have to do that. You want to just grow tomatoes in a space for the whole season, that's totally fine too. But I wanted to try to make the most as possible, or get the most as possible out of my garden space that I had. So anywho, I noted down my frost dates up here now. I garden in a zone 6A. This is what the Farmer's Almanac site tells me, but just based on past experience, I've always planted at least my summer stuff, I would always plant it out the May long weekend. That's usually somewhere around the 20th, somewhere around there. Sometimes, and again, depending on the weather, if the weather doesn't look good for that 10-day period after that mid-May timing, like if I'm trying to get my tomatoes out and the forecast is showing temperatures that are under 10 Celsius, I'm going to wait, just because unless I plan on going out there and covering overnight and whatnot, which, who has time to do that? If that's your thing, by all means, go for it. But I'm not into that. So I'd rather just wait, keep them inside, hold out until the weather for the next 10-day forecast looks good, and will, not put my new transplants at risk. I'd rather just wait. So usually, so depending on what the Farmer's Almanac says, like right now, this is going to be my first season starting things indoors and transplanting them outside, not in containers, in actual raised beds. And I think, even though it says that it's May 8th is the last frost, I'm still going to wait until the May long weekend, just because. And then even then, I'll keep an eye on the forecast. So my plan, so once I have that information, I make my list of plants that I want to grow, and then I'll just grow, I'll note down what their days to maturity is. And this is going to come into play in my next tab here on my little chart. The growth days to maturity. Now, remember guys, days to maturity is not the days from germination. It's the days from when you transplant it outside. This is obviously, this is relates to if you're starting your seeds indoors. So that's a key. That's key because there's a difference there, right? And when you start your seeds inside, they say that when you get to their second or third set of true leaves, that's when they're safe to transplant. For some stuff, that's probably okay. For tomatoes, I push that out to at least 4 to 6 weeks, just to make sure that they're strong enough, they're, vigorous enough to withstand whatever the weather can throw at them. So for me, that's usually about 6 weeks. And that comes with time and just trying some things, testing, seeing how they do. And it also doesn't include that week of hardening off, which I'll get to also in a second once we start the actual chart. Where I got the seeds is the source, the number of plants I want to grow. So depending on the space that you have, how many of that plant do you want to grow? So this allows me to count how many seeds I have, how many seeds I need to buy in the space of my garden. Again, this will make sense in a second. And then any notes that are relevant when the seed germinates at what temperature, as an example. Here's one for basil where transplant only once the plant has grown to 3 inches and has 2 sets of leaves. So it's little things like that. If there's anything that I need to remind myself of or just to pay attention to, I just take a note of it. These dates, this gets filled in after I do my chart. So we'll get to that in a second. So once I do my list, I make my list of plants, all the things that I want to grow. I note down their days to maturity. Everything else kind of evolves as I'm creating the chart and moving things around. So let me jump over to the chart and we'll take a look. And then you'll see I have this chart and then spring, summer, and fall. So depending on what it is that I want to grow in those seasons, those will kind of evolve as well during the planning process. So here's my chart. Let me go up to the top. I note my beds. Each bed that I have it's 2 by 8. You know what? Let me walk through my spring plan. This will make more sense. So I number all my beds, bed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to 14. Right now, I've got plants already in there that have overwintered. These are my berry bushes. They're all fine. Garlic is also there from what we planted last October. So I'm leaving that there. Everything else I'm either starting seeds indoors or I'm going to direct seed. Peas, they do better if they're direct seeded, so I haven't started those indoors. All of the lettuce I've started indoors. I'm going to direct seed turnips and carrots and radishes. Everything else, and the green onion, I'll direct seed the green onion. They just do better that way. And then everything else I've started indoors, including the spinach, the arugula, and all of the lettuce. And then I'm going to buy seed potatoes and seed onions in a few weeks and direct sow those as well. But this is what I mean when I say, like bed 1, it's bed 1. I've got blueberries in there. If I look at, let me get a good example here. We'll use the lettuce. So in bed 3, I've got squares 1 to 4. I'm putting romaine lettuce. In squares 5 to 8, I'm putting buttercrunch lettuce. 9, 10, 11, 12, I'm putting Grand Rapids lettuce, and then corn salad in 12 or 13, 12, 13, 14, 15. No, that's not 13, 14, 15, 16. And that's just to help me keep track of what's planted where. You don't have to get this technical if you just want to write lettuce on your sheet or in your spreadsheet or on your paper. Layout, totally fine. But for me, it just helps me plan. So let's look at the chart. So this chart, I've color coded it. Anything that's a perennial that comes back year after year, I've just marked it in purple. Annuals are yellow. And this little chart, this little legend up here, it's indoor means I'm starting the seeds indoors, which I did for all the lettuce back in on February 15th or whatever that weekend was. The blue is direct sow. So I know I'm going to be direct sowing my peas March 28th. Depending on the weather, depending on the thaw. Direct sow in the spring, it's as soon as the soil can be worked. So that's kind of dependent on the climate and the weather and how things are going. But I'm going to start checking the week of March 22nd. So that's all the direct sow. Transplanting it's a two-part process, right? Because you have to harden off your seedlings. And hardening off is when you bring your seed tray outside, let them out there for an hour on day one, bring them back in. The next day, you'll put them out there for 2 hours and then bring them back in. And that's just to slowly get them accustomed to outdoor conditions, wind, sun, things like that. Because they've had a pretty good life indoors, right? They're under grow lights. There's maybe some wind from a fan, an oscillating fan that you've been, but other than that, they're not used to outdoor conditions. So you have to gradually introduce them to the conditions so that they don't, get shocked once they get true wind and sun, and it could impact them. So my hardening off week, HO, at the transplant process, I'll do that probably for about a week, and depending on how they look, I'll then transplant them outside into their permanent spot, usually the week after. Again, depending on weather, depending on how the seedlings look, if they look like they're tough enough. And you'll notice the leaves get like, I don't even know what to call it, but they it's not a coating, but they have this outer toughness. I don't even know how to explain it. Or you know what? Maybe I'll take progressive snapshots over the course of that hardening off week, and I'll show you what I mean. I find it particularly obvious on tomato plants where indoors they're soft, they're nice, they're green, they're not delicate, but more delicate than after the week of hardening off. Anyway, so hardening off, that's the green. And then my target, ballpark harvest time is the red. So usually that means this is your days to maturity. So let's go back to the tomatoes. Where are my tomatoes? Here. Bed 11, I'm going to put my cherry tomatoes. I'm starting the seeds the weekend of March 29th. Usually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 6 weeks later, usually till they get at least 2 or 3 of their true leaves, and they're strong enough to be able to withstand being hardened off and transplanted outside. So week 7, I'm going to harden them off. By May 24th, that's the May long weekend, at least where I am in Canada, and I'll transplant them out. And then usually from this date, let me look at my tomato packet. I've got one in front of me. It's about 60 days to maturity. So it's from this date. It's not from this date. It's not from when they've germinated somewhere around here. It's from this date when they're transplanted outside, and about 60 days after that. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, probably longer than that. Maybe I made a mistake here, but it's usually about, if these tomatoes are 60 days, that's about 7 weeks. 7 times 7, no, 8 weeks. 8 times 7, 56. So it's about after this point that you'll be able to start harvesting tomatoes. I mean, they'll grow, you'll see them, there's going to be the flowers, there's going to be green tomatoes, and then by the time you start harvesting, it's about 7 weeks after, at least for the variety that I've chosen. I'm looking at the Super Sweet 100 cherry tomato, which is about 60 days to maturity. Okay, now once you have all of that information, that's when you can start playing with a spring crop, and then depending on how long that takes, when can I put something else in there? In that spot after I've harvested it. So let me find another example. Here's one. Okay, so let's say I've started bok choy for my spring crop middle of February. I'm going to transplant them out in March, sometime, depending on the weather. And then usually I'll be harvesting bok choy sometime in the middle of May. Again, just assume everything I say is dependent on weather, because it always depends, right? If it's a long cold spring, if it's really rainy, it all depends. So ballpark, if everything goes according to plan, I'm harvesting bok choy sometime in May. Now, knowing that bed, or at least that row, that space in my garden, will be empty by the end of May. So if I want to plant something in that spot, I just work backwards. So if I want to be able to harden off, let's say sometime by the end of May, and transplant something end of May, early June, I would need to start them. And this one, I said I'm going to use turnips where my bok choy was. I need to start those seeds in April 12th, so that it gives it enough time to, germinate inside, grow the sets of leaves, and be able to harden them off, which is not in that spot yet. They're hardening off on my deck. And then transplant them out at the time where I think the bok choy will be harvested. And then again, they'll grow, and I'll harvest those sometime in July. And then in theory, I could technically grow something else in that spot after I'm planning on harvesting the turnips. But I just decided not to. But I have done it in the past where I had a spring crop, super quick, something for summer that was equally quick, and then a fall crop, all within that same space in the garden. And you can do that. You just have to plan for it, right? And the point of starting something indoors is to get ahead of the growing season. So as an example, if I'm planting, radishes is really quick. It's like 35 days to maturity. If you're let's use something else that takes a longer time. Okay, so we'll go back to those cherry tomatoes again. I'm starting the seeds at the end of March. I know between that time and the time I harvest is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. What is that? 13 times 7 is, let me do the math here real quick. 13 times 7 is 91. That's 90 days. That's 3 months. Other than if I started them indoor, if I direct seeded in May, 90 days from there would be end of May, would be end of June, end of July, end of August would be the earliest that I would be harvesting tomatoes if I direct seeded outside directly, which you can. You absolutely can. But I'd rather get a head start your seeds inside, transplant them, harvest them sooner than if you would be able to do that, than waiting, right? So, and again, those with shorter growing seasons in different zones and lower zones, you do everything you can to try to get a jump on getting stuff out of the ground. And the sooner in the ground, the sooner you harvest it. So it all depends. Okay, so this is the big complicated chart. And it only looks complicated because I have a lot of beds and a lot of rows that I'm tracking. But if you only have like one or two, the logic is the same, the math is the same. It's just, this is just the way that I keep track of it. All right. My next thing is I create a spring plan, summer plan, and fall plan. And all that is, it's the same beds. And my spring plan is everything that I've got going on in the spring. Anything that is still in the same bed, spring to summer, I leave the color there, but I just remove anything that's going on. So I know this was garlic. These are all my berries that are still there from, technically these are perennial. But the garlic, I know I'm not touching anything in that bed other than harvesting in July. So anything that's new, I know that I'm going to be transplanting or planting my tomatoes, melon, my green beans are going to go in the summer, and then this bed up here, spinach and turnips, and then carrots. And that's just for me to know I'm not touching anything else other than, watering and harvesting, except these in the summer, there's going to be a change there. And then in the fall, same concept. This was there from last year. This is still the green onions. This is all the stuff, not from last year, from last season, so summer. And then I'm going to be harvesting the onions, and I'm going to be planting kale down here in the fall. And then I'll be doing another round of greens. So we're going to do corn salad. We're going to be planting new garlic in the fall, so sometime in October, to be harvested the following summer. And then I'm going to be growing some rutabaga. And again, it's just to make the most of the space that I have that I do this. You could just, have one plan, grow one thing in the space that you have, harvest it, and do nothing. That's totally fine, totally acceptable. Might even be a good idea for a first-time gardener just to get the hang of it. But I like to make the most of my space, and that's just me. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about here, which I do this because, hold on, I'm going to get my little list up here. I like that, okay, on the 15th of February, it tells me what tasks to focus on that particular week. I print this out. Once it's done, I print it out, and then I carry this around with me throughout the garden season. And I'll put a little check mark. Okay, February 15th, I've done all my seeding, my indoor seeding, and then I don't have to worry about it. And then I check this week. Am I doing anything? No, I have nothing. Nothing planned for the 1st, for the March 8th, nothing. 15th, nothing. And then the next thing, this week, what am I doing? I'm going to be hardening off the lettuce and direct seeding peas, radishes, and green onions. And onions and potatoes. So I need to remember to go buy those, because those are the two that I still haven't bought yet. But at least there's a lot going on. Once the plan is done, I just let the plan run the schedule. And I know that there's nothing happening in the first 3 weeks of March. And then I'm going to start doing some stuff on the week of March 22nd. And then once that's done, you don't pay attention to those weeks and just look forward. And I also like to see that coming over here in August, look at all the harvesting that's going to be happening. It's super exciting. All the herbs get harvested. Once the leaves are big enough, you can start snipping away at them. And then maybe, what is this? This is the garlic that I know I'll be seeding in the fall. That's two sections, or most of the bed number 4. And then I've got a late sowing of lettuce. Lettuce, there's certain crops that like cooler weather, right? You'll learn that as well if you don't know already. Lettuce is one of them. Radishes is another. They just prefer the cool. So those are like spring crops, fall crops. And most of them grow really quickly. These are all things that you just get used to it, and you start to know what grows best in different seasons, what grows quickly. So I know that I'm going to have time to grow lettuce, or at least radishes. Where are my radishes? No matter. Based on how long it takes them to mature, the days to maturity. And I think that's it, guys. So we talked about the plans, we talked about the list of seeds, and as I'm doing this chart, I should mention, as I'm building this chart and seeing like what's going to be finished when, and then okay, since I know the romaine is going to we'll stop here. I'm going to harvest it over the course of several weeks. We do the cut and come again, so let the lettuce grow. Just snip leaves as we use it. I'll be able to direct sow my beans, and then these are the dates that I make note of, and then put them over here. The most important one is when I'm starting them. So my seed, the days when I'm going to seed them. So I know that, all the cabbage, the bok choy, the lettuce, arugula, all of that stuff that I'm starting was in February. I'm direct sowing radishes, peas, and green onions and potatoes. That's next. And I put this in order of seed date. That, again, that's just for me. That's a personal preference, so that I know all of this is done. And then I just start keeping a track of what's next. Now, when I put the plan together, let's say romaine lettuce. I've got 4 little squares of romaine lettuce here. For square foot gardening, lettuce is 9 plants per square foot. So I've got 4 squares, so that's 9 times 4, that's 36 plants. So I know that for my romaine lettuce, actually I did 4. I did 4 this time instead of 9. You technically could put 9 in a square for lettuce, but I'm putting I'm putting 4 per square, so that's 4 times 4, 16. But that tells me I need at least 16 seeds of romaine lettuce if I wanted to make sure that I have enough to 4 by 4 in this plan. When I'm starting my seeds, I need at least 16. I'll usually start a few more than 16 just to make sure that I have enough, and I'll pick the strongest ones to then transplant outside into the garden, into the raised bed. So again, that's up to you, but at least it tells you if this is your plan and this is how much lettuce you want, how many turnips, how many carrots, at least you know how many seeds you need to buy to support that plan, roughly, right? You don't have to make it you don't have to make it your life's work to make it super complicated. But at least it gives you a ballpark of how many you need, based on how many you already have, how many you need to buy additional, and when, just to make sure that you have them. And I think that's it, guys. Obviously, again, grow what you like, what your family likes, what you eat. Keep spacing under consideration if you have limited space. Grow things that you can get a lot from. Tomatoes, peas, beans, anything that produces a lot. Like if you plant 1 broccoli seed, you're getting 1 head of broccoli, and that's it. If you're okay with that, that's totally fine. Or if you love broccoli, grow tons of broccoli. But it's things like that the selection of which plants you grow and the return you get, to me, it was dependent on how much space I had and how much I can get out of that space, and the more bang for your buck. But by all means, go to town. If you like those things, like potatoes are cheap at the store. Well, maybe not so much anymore, but they used to be. But if you wanted to try your hand at growing some potatoes, yes, they do take a long time. They take up a pretty decent amount of space. But if you want to try, and if you like potatoes, by all means, you're the boss. This is your garden. You get to decide what you grow. And that is pretty much it. I think we'll leave it there for today. Happy growing. Super excited. We've started seeds. I've got my seedlings up and growing for spring. In a couple weeks, I'll be hopefully hardening them off and moving them outside. And I'll take you along. It'll be exciting. Take care, guys.